I mentioned that I wanted to like get
If you're
more
a
into like Warhammer lore and stuff in the last video in the comment section, and there was this one guy, Jim Carr, and he suggested this guy right here, Arbiter Ian, to learn some more Warhammer lore. So that's what we're gonna do today. And then after that, we're gonna spend some time playing that new Sparking Zero DLC, the Limit Breaker Journey part of it. And after that, then we'll see what happens. Probably me just going to bed because I got work early tomorrow instead of later in the day. So let's go ahead and get started.
regular on my channel, this video isn't really for you. But if you have a friend, partner, or family member who's mentioned Warhammer and you're vaguely aware of it without being totally sure what it actually is, then stay tuned. This is a quick introduction for the rest of you.
Probably just gonna watch the first two videos.
Hi, I'm Ian and I make videos about tabletop gaming, and I started doing that because a friend who had recently started reading Warhammer stories asked how it all fit together. And then recently another friend said something similar, like, I understand it's all about models or something, but what do you actually do? And I get it, Warhammer can be a bit confusing because it's a few different things all wrapped up in one hobby. And over time it's spread into being lots of different things, from video games to novel series to leggings. At its heart, Warhammer is a series of sci-fi and fantasy themed tabletop games. Like big board games, played in person around a table. However, the pieces for these games aren't just little tokens or markers.
I'm not very big on board games, so when I first heard of Warhammer, it was about like the board game stuff. I didn't know at the time that it was like this entire media conglomerate of different things. But now that I know that there's a few video games out for it, I'm interested. And I've already got a Dark Tide highlight video out of when I last played that on stream, and I have another video coming out tomorrow.
Extremely detailed miniatures and kits which you assemble and paint yourself. This means as a pastime it's somewhere between a board game or a card game and a craft hobby. And that arts and crafts part of the hobby is really important. For many people, building and painting a unique collection is a way bigger part of the hobby than playing the games. And having fun moving your army around the board in a social setting is much more important than winning the games. The games themselves are often battles between different armies, and so the name for this type of game is tabletop wargame, or maybe miniature wargame. And there are a load of different tabletop wargames available. Warhammer's just the biggest brand, made by the British company Games Workshop, and the only one that has its own retail chain, which is why Warhammer's often the first one people come across. Oh, if you've got this far and you think you might be on the wrong video, then let's briefly touch on a few things Warhammer's easily confused with. Is this Dungeons and Dragons? D&D, or Dungeons and Dragons, is a role-playing game, a different sort of in-person tabletop game where the players all work together to tell a shared story, usually an adventure or a mystery.
Screenshot.
D&D does use miniatures, but it's not really about the miniatures. They're only really used when you're in, say, a fight scene and you need to keep track of where people are standing. There's a lot of crossover between these two things. Many people like both role-playing games and tabletop war games, but they're not the same thing. Is it like Warcraft? Okay, so this comes up a lot because Warcraft's got a similar name, but Warcraft is a series of video games set in a fantasy world. Again, its universe has been expanded into other media, but it's firmly, first and foremost, a video game. It's not the same thing. The names are just really similar. Is it like Magic cards? A bit like role-playing games, collectible card games are still in the same world as tabletop war games, but they're very different. Magic is primarily a card game. Again, it's been expanded into other media, and it's often quite competitive, and it doesn't have any of the craft side of things that Warhammer has. Is it like those old guys that recreate the Battle of Waterloo or build model train sets or something? Yes, sort of, yeah. Whether they're a game or not, we tend to call this stuff historicals. And when it comes to modeling and crafting, we tend to share a lot of the same painting or modeling or craft skills. But most of those hobbies are primarily about recreating historical events. Because of the fantasy and sci-fi setting, Warhammer tends to be a bit more creative. So, we're on the right video. Let's carry on. All of Games Workshop's Warhammer games take place in one of two shared universes, settings with their own background and history, just like most fantasy or sci-fi franchises nowadays. The first setting is called Age of Sigmar, and it's a high fantasy world with elves and orcs and knights. The second and most popular is called Warhammer 40,000, or 40k for short.
Okay, so is Vermintide in this Age of Sigmar universe? Because that was the first Warhammer game I played. So I'm guessing that the Vermintide and Vermintide 2 games, excuse me, take place in the Age of Sigmar. And Darktide is 40k.
It's a far future dystopian sci-fi setting with space elves, space orcs, and space knights. The settings and the games have been around since the 1980s, and in that time they've been...
I wasn't looking at the screen, it says space elves. I want to see space elves.
Future dystopian sci-fi setting with space elves, space orcs, and space knights. The settings and the games have been around since the 1980s, and in that time they've been constantly added to and expanded through new versions of the games, completely new games, or the massive series of in-world novels published by Games Workshop. Sometimes they've even been completely restarted. The fantasy setting used to be a much more Tolkien-esque place called the Warhammer world, but in 2015 they rebooted it into the current Age of Sigmar setting, which is less of a Tolkien-esque world and more of a high fantasy or anime-influenced one. After 35 years of this, they're really rich and detailed settings, some of the most detailed shared universes in existence, and there are many people whose main interaction with Warhammer is just reading about the setting, reading the novels and the background. Games Workshop's imprint Black Library has published hundreds of novels set in these worlds at this point, and some of them have hit the New York Times bestseller lists. Games Workshop also licenses other companies to produce products in their world.
I'm not sure if I want to read the books or not, man. I mean, I'm an avid reader. I'm not going to tell you what I read. It's kind of embarrassing. But I'm not sure if I want to like actually pick up a book and read that shit. Maybe listen to an audiobook, because these days I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read an actual book these days. That's why a lot of my reading is done with audiobooks. I guess I can check what's it called, Amazon or something, and see if they have any Warhammer audiobooks, but I wouldn't know where to start.
Which is why you might have seen Warhammer video games, or role-playing games, or comic books, or leggings. The one exception to this is that Games Workshop also make a line of Lord of the Rings games based on the Peter Jackson films from the early 2000s. They're not set.
This is gonna sound crazy, but I've never seen a single one of the Lord of the Rings movies. Haven't seen Hobbit, haven't seen Desolation of Smaug, haven't seen any of that stuff. Haven't seen a single little bit. I've been wanting to watch them, but just haven't really found a moment in time that I want to sit down and do it.
In the Warhammer worlds, but everything else is. So, how do these games actually work? What do we do? Well, as I said, Games Workshop make lots of different Warhammer games. Some are traditional board games containing everything you need to play, and then others are more like board games with expansions, where when you get bored with the box contents, you can buy an expansion team or set. But the sort of flagship thing you think of when you picture Warhammer is the skirmish or mass battle games, where the board is replaced by a modelled and painted battlefield. In these games, each squad or model has a load of different abilities, and instead of spaces on a board, they move around the table a number of inches each turn. These big games are designed to be really flexible and expandable. You don't necessarily have to buy a box game with all the pieces included. Instead, you just buy a copy of the rules and whichever models you like the look of. When you want to play a game, you assemble those models into an army, and the game includes rules for how you have to assemble your army. Usually, models cost a certain amount of points depending on how good they are. So when you play a game, to keep it balanced, you pick a maximum point level and bring models that total that amount of points. That way you can just buy more models when you feel like it and swap them out for something else in your army, depending on what you want to play with that day. All these different elements mean that Warhammer can be quite a big and engrossing hobby with lots of different facets, and people can go as far down the rabbit hole as they want. At the simplest level, people might buy some model kits, put them together, paint them using some acrylic paints, and then play some games. But people who really enjoy the assembly part of things might combine different model kits to create unique models, we call that converting, or start to sculpt parts.
Would those models still be allowed in the game? I mean, I guess so, since he's talking about it. But yeah, this part of Warhammer is not really, this doesn't really interest me, if I'm being completely honest.
arts themselves, either with modeling putty or in 3D. For lots of people, Warhammer's all about the painting. A lot of people paint but don't really play the games, and they use airbrushes or materials usually used in fine art to create stunning work. There are national level painting competitions. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are plenty of people who don't want to get involved in the physical and craft aspects of the hobby and maybe want to just read the novels or play one of the many video games that have been produced over the years. And finally, those who are really into the gameplay might spend their time trying to construct the most powerful army or competing in tournaments. This way of playing, called competitive Warhammer, isn't the most popular side of the hobby, but it's one of the things most frequently talked about online, and plenty of sites host discussions about the best tactics, the best units, or the best equipment to give them. New models and units are released every few months, so some people really enjoy keeping up with the constantly evolving state of the game. Of course, all this has spawned a massive online community and a sizable industry to support that. YouTube is full of channels much bigger than mine, with painting tutorials, discussions of gameplay, product reviews, and advice on everything from sculpting to 3D printing. Award-winning painters organize courses and classes for people to attend. Whole companies exist to make hobby tools or scenery for your board, or third-party bits to make your models look more unique. If you don't like to paint, you can hire commission painters to make your models look good. If you want to test your skill, conventions and tournaments exist that pull in anywhere from 20 to a few hundred players. For many people, that wider community is what Warhammer is. Whether online or in real life, it's a very social, community-driven hobby with enough variety to keep people involved for, well, decades at this point. For me, this is an old friend, something that's just been around since I was a kid. When I was a kid, this was an excuse to hang out with my school friends. Now I'm an adult, well, it's still an excuse to hang out with friends. But it's also a nice escape from work. When I'm building or painting some models, I'm not answering emails about 10 projects at once or working on long deadlines. It's something very calming and in the moment that I can pick up for a few hours in the evening and where I usually achieve something at the end, however silly that achievement is. There are other questions related to this one. Is Warhammer for kids? How much does it cost? But this is only meant to be a brief intro, so I'm going to stop there. Hopefully it's been helpful, and if not, I'll link to some Dungeons and Dragons content below. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, that was a very informative video, Mr. Ian, Arbiter Ian. Yeah, I already kind of knew, like, what it was overall. I thought it was going to tell me a little bit of, like, newer stuff, but a good video either way, you know. Already Ian, I'm going to go ahead and subscribe to you, since you're going to be my main man for information on Warhammer. Now I'm going to watch the second video, too. Oh, I did ask about, which one should I choose, actually, because I was planning on doing the whole Warhammer 40k timeline next. But I would literally just ask this question right here. That's not going to be useful for me right now because I don't know anything about Warhammer in the first place at the moment. I probably should watch that one and then that one. Where to start? Lore. Start with Warhammer 40k lore. Yeah, let's do the novel one. Let's do this, and then we can go. Then we're gonna go play some Dragon Ball.
Hi gang. So after doing 5 episodes of Book Club and a review of every Horus Heresy novel, one of the consistent things people have asked in the comments is where to start with all the Black Library novels. Like, where do you start reading about Warhammer 40k? And this is like a valid point. There are hundreds of novels at this point, and like many tie-in series, they were originally written for people who were already fans of the tabletop games, and I guess were expected to have some knowledge of the universe. Unlike other fantasy series that were novels first, in Warhammer, the novels aren't really expected to be your first step into these worlds, or at least weren't when they started coming out. So this can all be really confusing if you're new. Another thing with Black Library novels, particularly 40k Black Library novels, is that there's no linear timeline. Warhammer 40k is a setting that spans thousands of years, so instead of there being an official reading order with a starting novel, Black Library novels are split up into loads and loads of mini-series and trilogies that could take place at any point in those thousands of years and may or may not be affected by the events in other trilogies. So in this video, I'm going to go through a few good starting points for people new to the setting or who just want to see what it's all about. I'm also going to try and stick to some of the more well-known and more well-regarded authors just because I want these to be enjoyable reads for people who are used to reading sci-fi in general. Finally, before we start, if you are new to the 40k setting, it's worth mentioning that while the setting has remained pretty static for the last 30 years, there's been a big leap forward in the great universe-wide narrative of the setting since about 2017. Previously, Warhammer 40,000 novels were set some point in the 41st millennium. That's the year starting 40,000 and something. And they still are, but also there's now an advancing timeline right at the very end of that time period, and that timeline affects the setting as a whole. You don't have to start with those recent timeline novels, and Black Library is still publishing books set in the entire 41st millennium, but I'll just make clear which ones are which as we go through them. Right, where to start? Well, Black Library actually has a page for that. I think this list is okay. It seems very focused on getting you up to speed with the most recent events and most recent novels, but there are some really good ones here, and in fact there's a few classics, so let's start with those. The Eisenhorn trilogy has, for a very long time now, been considered a really good entry point into the world of 40k. In fact, it's so famous as an entry point that I recommended it to my friend Mira when she was getting into the universe, and we've been reviewing the books.
Alright. Eisenhorn trilogy. Hold on, guys, hold on. Nope. Starter pack. Eisenhorn trilogy. Well, Eisenhorn trilogy. Alright. Put that back with her.
As she reads through them on my book club series, but don't go there if you haven't read them yet, because, you know, spoilers. The trilogy tells the story of Gregor Eisenhorn, an Imperial Inquisitor, which is kind of a secret agent detective character within the main human faction in 40k, the Imperium. Through the trilogy, we see him investigate and battle the forces of chaos, kind of the main antagonist in the setting, all while trying to remain on the right side of the tracks and resist the temptations of the dark side. Sound familiar? They're written by Dan Abnett, an established comic and sci-fi author who's widely considered to be one of the best writers working for the Black Library, and they have the feel of an old-fashioned detective novel, which is, to be fair, a much easier entry point than a giant, colossal war story. They're written in the first person, which makes them very personal and immersive, and the fact that you're witnessing these events through the eyes of an Inquisitor, themselves something of an outsider in the Imperium, means that there's plenty of good opportunities for the main characters to explain how the world works.
Bro, have a book on his chest. Is that a book? Yes, it is. All right.
Means that there's plenty of good opportunities for the main characters to explain how the world works. Though they take the reader on a journey across the whole 40k universe, they're ultimately very character-based novels, more about the experience of the main characters and how they deal with the somewhat nihilistic setting they find themselves in, rather than, say, universe-wide world-changing plot. Bear in mind that although there's plenty of action in the trilogy, these aren't battlefield novels. They're not there to dramatize a tabletop game of 40k, and they don't feature many of the models you might see on the tabletop. They're set behind the scenes. They explain the world all those battles are set in, which is why they're really good starting points. The original Eisenhorn trilogy consists of Xenos, Malleus, and Hereticus, also available in an omnibus, and the Black Library starting page lists Xenos as one of its recommendations. Yeah, which is a good one. Though the Eisenhorn trilogy ends there, some of the characters continue into Dan Abnett's other trilogies, so if you like them...
There's really not a whole lot I can add because all this information is new to me. So I just gotta let it play and take in what he's saying. There's nothing for me to add. I don't know anything.
There's room for you to continue following them. Okay, but what if you want something a bit more battlefield focused? Gaunt's Ghosts is our second series by Dan Abnett, a long-running series about a regiment of the Astra Militarum or Imperial Guard as they're shipped from warzone to warzone in a decades-long war against the forces of chaos. The main character, Ibram Gaunt, is another outsider. In fact, this whole regiment are somewhat outsiders, which means we get a nice, slightly outside view of how the Imperial Guard works, how things in Imperial war zones are done, and all the different environments and cultures within the the Imperium that they come into contact with. There is a main character, the titular Ibram Gaunt, but really this is much more of an ensemble piece, with equal weight given to characters from across this regiment, from the raw recruits to the regimental command to the hangers-on, family members and civilians that travel with them. While loads of the novels take place on the battlefield, with recognisable units from the game involved, there's also a ton that happens behind the scenes, and the books spend a lot of time exploring how this army would actually function in the greater war machine of the Imperium.
Okay.
Again, it's really all about how these characters interact with this world. The books are available as a series of...
Hold on. Bro, I didn't know what I should put as my category for this, okay? I'm technically watching YouTube. Yeah, it has to do with Warhammer, but I'm technically still just watching YouTube. It's gonna be changed to Dragon Ball Sparking Zero in like 5 minutes anyway. And why is this shit on light mode? Because I like light mode. Bitch, if you can't handle light mode, that doesn't mean your eyes are weak. That's not my fucking problem. That's not my fault, man. Be stronger. Every time I look at you, you remind, if I had a little brother, you'd look like him. Whatever you say, 35-year-old man. Explains why I always want to beat you up. Bro, I ain't even did nothing. I'm just doing. I ain't even did nothing. What did I do? I ain't done shit yet. You hurt my eyes, blood. Well, right now I'm too tired to actually give you some type of comeback list. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna press this and go back to watching
editions
my
with
Warhammer
3 novels
video,
in each
okay?
book, and the first of
Also, One Mind Syndicate are my guys to watch for 40k. One Mind Syndicate. Because that guy right there, Arbiter Ian, was somebody that was recommended to me. One Mind Syndicate. This guy. It's the guy. Because that guy I'm watching now, Arbiter Ian, he was recommended to me by somebody that was in my comment section of the last Warhammer video I uploaded here on YouTube. He said it was a great place to start off at. Yeah, I'm gonna keep that right there for now. I'm gonna finish all of this guy's videos first. Not tonight, but I'm gonna finish all of this guy's videos. And then I'll go over here to One Mind Syndicate, I guess, because he's basically showing me like all the stuff that a brand new person to Warhammer would probably need to know.
Those, The Founding is in Black Library's big list. If you were reading them individually, I'd actually recommend you start with the third novel, Necropolis. It still sets up the premise from the first 2 books, but it plunges you into a much more interesting and many-sided conflict, the siege of a huge hive city on an industrial world. We meet our spread of characters from the ghosts, but they're serving alongside the city defense forces, and the plot spends a lot of time with the civilians from the city attempting to survive the coming war, and all these points of view are really good for a newcomer. Plus, the enemy in this are terrifying, and it really conveys well the brutality of the 41st millennium. Anyway, although I would recommend that as your starting point, it's the last book in this Founding trilogy. So
how you doing, brother, man? I'm doing good, man. I'm pretty all right. I meant to stream both yesterday and today, but I had company over and we ended up just like playing that new Avatar fighting game a whole lot yesterday. They came over at like 12 and they didn't leave until like 10 o'clock, so we were over here just fucking around for like 10 hours playing that fighting game. I hear that's good. It is good. It's very good. Unfortunately for me, I'm used to playing Tekken, right? And you know how fast you gotta do Tekken inputs? Unfortunately, that new Avatar game, its input, what do you call it? Its input delay is way higher, basically. I think that's what it is. I don't know how to describe it because I've only like recently gotten into fighting games for real. But basically, when I'm pressing the fucking D-pad to make my moves come out, I'm pressing it too fast and the Avatar game cannot read the input. So I have to actively slow down my fingers, and it's fucking me up real bad when I go and fight people online. It was fucking me up real bad when I was playing against guys here at my house locally. Just playing versus battles against everybody else. Yeah, I recognize the problem. You know, at least you recognize the problem. Yeah, yeah. It's just so difficult to fix my finger speed because yesterday it's not like the Avatar game was the only fighting game we played. We played Tekken, uh, Guilty Gear, Street Fighter. We were playing a bunch of different fighting games, so I had to keep adjusting my finger speed for each and every one, and it was terrible until we got back to Tekken, because then I could just like move my fingers on instinct, and I was fine.
So I guess start at the start. So historically, those have been two of the most popular series. We spent a lot of time with human characters, and I think that's a good thing, but what if we wanted to plunge into 40k with the most famous faction, Space Marines? Well, picking Space Marine novels is a little bit harder. There are loads
Marines,
of
that's a
them,
new
but
game.
as post-human super soldiers bred only for war and who are also meant to be like really horrible, they're not necessarily the most compelling characters to write. It's much harder to find good entry points for them, and some of the best Space Marine novels actually have loads of human characters around to give you points of view characters. However, the current timeline is very focused on them, and so are a lot of the Black Library recommendations. If you're looking to start with the current timeline, then the Dawn of Fire series, currently only 2 books in, is a really good introduction, especially the first novel, Avenging Sun. We explore a part of the galaxy.
They said the Dawn of Fire. Dawn of Fire series.
From the point of view of a recently activated Ultramarine captain, and hear about his conflicted relationship with the Mechanicus, his own status, and his Primarch, Robert Guillermin, an overarching presence in all these modern novels. It's got plenty of action. The lead character's a Primaris Space Marine from one of the standard, not too weird chapters. It's pretty good, and I think the Dawn of Fire series is probably a better introduction to the current setting than the other big series, Dark Imperium, which throws you right in at the very top of the Imperial command structure without, I think, much explanation. I think the best...
He just said his name wrong. Click off this video. Did he say his name wrong, or is it just his accent? Also, I'm like 4 minutes away from finishing it, so I'm gonna finish the video, man.
Space Marine novel in the current timeline, though, is Spears of the Emperor by Aaron Dempsey.
Are you being extra right now? You being extra right now because he said it wrong? Maybe. Yeah, I think you're being a bit extra.
In which we follow a Space Marine emissary from a very by-the-book chapter as he goes to reinforce a weakened and out-of-touch chapter on the other side of the Great Rift. This book is much smaller and more contained in scope than many of the other recent 40k novels, because it's about this one mission. And we get to see not only very different sides of the Imperium, but also 2 really different ways of being a Space Marine. Also, a lot of this book's told from the point of view of 2 really brilliantly written human characters, so you get a good outside eye on all of this. In a similar style to this is Dan Abnett's Brothers of the Snake. This is a bit older, set earlier in the 41st millennium, but similarly to Spears of the Emperor, it's a really good look at the escalating scale of Space Marine stories, tracking a single Space Marine in a series of encounters as he rises through the ranks of his chapter. I think this is a really good first novel if you particularly want to look at Space Marines. And lastly, on the Space Marine front, if all this backstage character building is a bit much, then there's always the Space Marine Battles series, which I guess is a series of standalone action novels. Some of my highlights in this are Hell's Reach by Aaron Dembski Bowden and Wrath of Iron by Chris Wright, which also do a really good job of showing just how...
See, just now, instead of saying Wrath, he said Wrath. Wrath of Iron. I think it's just because he's British.
How horrible Space Marines can be. Okay, that's enough Space Marine action. The last thing I wanted to go into here is
them UK
crime.
accents.
We said earlier that one of the reasons books like Eisenhorn are such good introductions to the setting is that they have the format of a detective novel where the lead character is actively searching for more information. Well, there's a few more Black Library novels that do the same thing. The Shira Calpurnia series by Matthew Farrer is really good for this. Calpurnia is an arbitrator, the space police of the setting, recently reassigned to a major hub planet and who has to come to terms with her new role, which requires a lot more politics, diplomacy, and intrigue than her previous role, which was kind of as a riot cop. It's another trilogy, and in each book we get a really in-depth look at an imperial culture and the various factions that make it work. From the ruling nobility of a planet in the first book...
Damn! He fat as fuck. They do talk different. They say lieutenant as lieutenant. Yeah, I heard them say that before. I've heard a British guy say it that way before too. But yeah, why is he so fat? Well, because he eats a lot of food.
To
But
the secretive world of astro-telepaths in the third book. Again, it's a gentler introduction away from the battlefield, but all three novels are really, really interesting ways into the hobby. And finally, on that note, I haven't read any of these, but Black Library have just started a Warhammer crime imprint that apparently is really, really good. Again, maybe that's a really nice way into the setting. Now, most of the stuff I've been recommending has been from the Imperium's point of view, and I still think that's probably a good idea. They are the human faction, they're the protagonists in pretty much all the storylines, but if you did want a different point of view, then Brutal Cunning and The Infinite and the Divine are really good starting points. Brutal Cunning by Mike Brooks is loads of fun, written from the point of view of the orcs invading a Mechanicum Forge world, and The Infinite and the Divine looks into the thousands of years long relationship between two Necron characters. Right, that should be enough to get you started. A load of options, whether you want to start with the setting or on the battlefield, whether you want to start with the current timeline or any point in the entire 41st millennium. Of course, there are hundreds of novels and I haven't read them all, so if you think I've forgotten something, then put it in the comments below and maybe we'll get round to doing it in book club. Thanks for watching.
Alright, that's a nice little video.
Like to hear more,
nice little video. Give me some more recommendations. Well, I got 2 recommendations. There was actually, what was that one that he said earlier that I was kind of interested in? This something about snakes, Brothers of the Snake. That one. Let me put that on the list. Brothers of the Snake, right? All right. Now I got a couple of novels on here that I can look up later. I've already got myself like 2 Warhammer games to play, Vermintide and Darktide. I was thinking about getting Rogue Trader too, because I heard that one was like an RPG type thing. It seemed interesting.